No one came back for her. The base stood empty under a sky that promised nothing. Warning lights blinked red against concrete walls scorched black from mortar fire 3 weeks prior. Wind screamed through gaps in the chain-link fencing, carrying dust that tasted like cordite and abandonment. They said she was just support personnel. They said she wouldn't last an hour if contact came. But when the enemy surged forward, 92 shadows moving through darkness, she was still there. White hair visible beneath the moonlight, rifle cold in her hands. 8 hours later, the base still stood. And everyone had to learn something they should have known. They left the wrong person behind. Hour 01847 hours. Sergeant Lauren Hayes stood in the center of Forward Operating Base Redemption and listened to the silence. It wasn't peaceful. Silence on a military installation was never peaceful. It meant something had gone wrong, or was about to. The convoy had pulled out 47 minutes ago. She'd watched the last Humvee disappear into the valley haze, its taillights swallowed by distance and dust. Captain Morrison had looked back once through his window, caught her eye, then looked away. That told her everything. Lauren was 34 years old. She'd been in the service for 12 years, 8 of those as a designated marksman. Her hair had gone completely white at 29, premature graying, the medical officer said, probably stress-related. She'd stopped dyeing it after a while. Let them see it. Let them remember her. The operations center was a converted shipping container reinforced with sandbags and steel plating. Inside, 3 computer terminals glowed softly, displaying tactical maps that no longer mattered. The radio set crackled with static, not dead, just disconnected from anyone who cared to listen. She walked the perimeter, her boots echoing on the concrete. FOB Redemption sat on a plateau overlooking Route Whiskey, the main supply corridor through the province. It was supposed to be a strategic position. 3 months ago, it had been home to 47 personnel. Then the offensive shifted east. Resources got reallocated. The base became a waypoint, then a checkpoint, then a name on a list of installations scheduled for closure. Lauren had been assigned here 6 weeks ago. Overwatch duty, they called it. Babysitting an empty road. She checked the guard towers north, south, east, west. Each one offered commanding views of the approaches. Good firing positions. Reinforced positions. Not that it mattered if you were the only person holding them. The armory was locked, but she had the codes. Inside, she found what they'd left behind. 3 cases of 7.62mm ammunition, 200 rounds of .50 caliber for the mounted gun on Tower North, a dozen fragmentation grenades that should have been logged out months ago, and her own rifle, an M110 semi-automatic sniper system that she'd zeroed herself and trusted more than most people. They'd taken everything else. The crew-served weapons, the night vision equipment, even the medical supplies beyond basic first aid. Lauren carried 2 ammunition crates to Tower North and stacked them against the wall. Then she did the same for towers east and west. South Tower was too exposed, she'd avoid it unless absolutely necessary. The sun was setting. Temperature would drop fast after dark. She grabbed her field jacket from her bunk in the barracks, empty now except for her gear and the ghosts of soldiers who'd rotated home or forward. Her reflection caught her in a cracked mirror near the latrine. White hair pulled back in a tight bun, face weathered from sun and wind, gray eyes that had seen too many things end badly. She looked tired. She was tired. But tired didn't matter, not yet. At 1,923 hours, the perimeter motion sensors started chirping. Lauren was in the operations center, reviewing topographic maps by the light of a single LED lantern. She'd shut down 2 of the 3 terminals to conserve the generator fuel. Who knew how long she'd need power? The sensor display showed movement on the southern approach. Multiple contacts. She moved to the window and glassed the area with her rangefinder. Nothing visible in the fading light. But the sensors didn't lie. Something was out there, and it was moving toward the base. Could be wild dogs, could be displaced civilians, could be a recon element probing for weaknesses. She'd been told the area was clear. Command had said the enemy had pulled back 50 kilometers to regroup. That's why they'd stripped the base. No threat, no need for personnel. But the sensors were screaming otherwise. Lauren grabbed her rifle and moved to Tower North. From 20 feet up, she had a 360-degree view. She scanned the darkening landscape through her scope, breathing slow and even. There. Movement in the tree line, 800 meters out, not dogs. Too coordinated, not civilians, too tactical. She counted 6 figures moving in a staggered formation, then 3 more behind them. Then she lost count because they blended into shadows and vegetation with the practiced ease of experienced infantry. Her radio crackled not with a voice, but with the automated emergency beacon she'd activated. It would broadcast her position and situation to any friendly forces in range. No one answered. No one was close enough to hear. Lauren settled into a shooting position, rifle braced against sandbags. She ranged the lead figure, 820 meters, wind 3 kilometers per hour from the west, temperature dropping, humidity low. She could take the shot, drop the lead man, scatter the others, buy herself time to fortify or escape. But if she fired, she confirmed her presence, confirmed the base wasn't empty. And if there were 9 contacts visible, how many were invisible? She waited, watched. The figures moved closer, 700 meters now. They were headed directly for the base. No deviation, no hesitation. They knew. Somehow, they knew someone was still here. At 600 meters, they split into 3 groups. Classic assault formation, 2 groups flanking, 1 center. Professional, coordinated. Lauren's finger rested against the trigger guard. Not the trigger. Not yet. 500 meters. 400. At 350 meters, she saw the weapons clearly through her scope. AK pattern rifles, RPG tubes, belt-fed machine guns. This wasn't a recon patrol. This was an assault element. And they were coming for her base, her position, her. Lauren exhaled slowly, settled her crosshairs on the center mass of the lead figure, and made a decision. She would not run. She would not hide. This was her post. She was still on duty. And if they wanted this base, they'd have to go through her to take it. The first shot broke the silence at 1,947 hours. 10 days earlier, Brigade, Headquarters. Captain Edward Morrison had reviewed the deployment roster 3 times, and each time he circled back to the same problem. Forward Operating Base Redemption needed at least minimal staffing until the official closure, but no one wanted to send personnel to a position that would be abandoned within 2 weeks. What about Hayes? Lieutenant Chen had suggested, pointing at the personnel manifest on the conference room screen. Morrison frowned. The sniper? Designated marksman, Chen corrected. She's currently unassigned after her previous team rotated home. Good record, solid shooter, quiet. Quiet, Morrison repeated, which was military speak for doesn't cause problems. Major Paulson, the operations officer, barely looked up from his tablet. Hayes is fine. She can handle Overwatch on an empty road. Nothing's happening in that sector anyway. Intel says the enemy pulled back to regroup after the January offensive. Morrison hesitated. Something felt wrong about sending a single soldier to hold a position designed for 40, but the alternative was leaving it completely unmanned, which violated a dozen regulations about asset security and territorial control. How long? He asked. 2 weeks maximum, Paulson said. Then we extract her with the last supply run and officially close the base. Chen pulled up Hayes' service record. 12 years in, multiple deployments, marksmanship scores in the expert range consistently. Disciplinary record, clean. Medical record. 1 notation about premature graying, otherwise healthy. She's steady, Chen said. Won't panic if something unexpected happens. Nothing's going to happen, Paulson insisted. The sector's cold. We're pulling out because there's no threat, not because we're retreating. Hayes sits in a tower for 2 weeks, files, reports, and comes home. Easy duty. Morrison signed the order because that's what captains did. They followed the direction of majors, even when their instincts screamed otherwise. 3 days later, he'd driven Hayes out to FOB Redemption himself. She'd said maybe 15 words the entire 2-hour trip. When they arrived, she'd surveyed the base with an expression that revealed nothing. You'll be alone here, Morrison had told her, which she clearly already knew. Supply run every 4 days, radio check twice daily. If anything seems off, you call it in immediately. Yes, sir. Intel says the area's clear, but stay sharp. Always do, sir. He'd wanted to say something else, something about how this wasn't personal, how she wasn't being punished or forgotten, but Hayes had already turned away. walking toward the guard tower with her rifle bag slung over her shoulder, white hair bright against her tan uniform. She looked small against the vast, empty base, vulnerable. He'd pushed that thought away and driven back to headquarters, where there were 100 other problems that seemed more urgent. 5 days before the decision. The emergency pullout order came at 1,620 hours on a Tuesday. Intelligence had intercepted communications indicating a major enemy offensive was forming not in Hayes' sector, but 3 zones east. Every available unit was being redirected to reinforce defensive positions before the attack materialized. Morrison was coordinating the movement of 2 companies when Lieutenant Chen appeared in his doorway. "Sir, what about FOB Redemption?" Morrison looked at his map. Redemption sat far from the projected attack zone, isolated on the wrong side of the province. "Leave it," Paulson said from across the operations center. "We need every vehicle and every body for the eastern defensive line. 1 soldier in a cold zone doesn't justify pulling assets from the real fight." Chen pressed. "Sir, Hayes is still out there, alone. If intel is wrong about the sector being clear." "Intel isn't wrong," Paulson snapped. "The enemy is moving east, not west. Hayes is safer where she is than she would be in convoy trying to link up with us during a major troop movement. We'll extract her after the offensive is repelled." Morrison stared at the map. Redemption was marked with a small blue icon, a single soldier, miles from support, surrounded by terrain that could hide a battalion. "Radio her," he ordered. "Let her know the situation." Chen tried. 3 times. The radio connection failed each time. Atmospheric conditions, distance, or equipment failure. Impossible to say which. "We'll send a bird once the situation stabilizes," Paulson said. "Hayes knows how to sit tight. That's her job." And that was that. The convoy pulled out that evening, heading east toward the sound of distant artillery. Morrison looked back once as they drove away from the road that led to FOB Redemption. In his gut, he knew they were making a mistake, but orders were orders, and the war didn't pause for 1 soldier's safety. Hour 1, 1,947 hours to 2,047 hours. The bullet left Lauren's rifle at 2,800 feet per second and struck the lead enemy combatant in the upper chest. Through her scope, she saw him jerk backward and collapse. The figures behind him scattered instantly, vanishing into the landscape like smoke. Silence flooded back. Lauren worked the bolt, chambering another round, and scanned for targets. Nothing. They'd gone to ground fast. Professional response, not panic. These weren't militia or opportunistic raiders. These were trained soldiers. She counted to 60. No movement. No return fire. Then, from 3 different positions simultaneously, muzzle flashes lit the darkness. Rounds snapped past the tower, punching into sandbags and ricocheting off steel supports. Lauren dropped below the wall, feeling the vibration of impacts through the concrete. They triangulated her position from a single shot, fast, coordinated, very professional. She low-crawled to the opposite side of the tower and rose just enough to sight through a gap in the sandbags. 2 figures were advancing on the eastern approach, using cover intelligently. She led the first by 2 feet, accounting for movement, and squeezed the trigger. The figure dropped, the second dove behind a drainage culvert. Lauren shifted to the southern arc. 3 contacts moving in fire and maneuver formation, 1 covered while 2 advanced, then they rotated. Military doctrine, properly executed. She targeted the covering man first. 1 shot. He went down. The other 2 froze, losing their tactical rhythm. Lauren fired twice more. 1 hit, 1 miss. The survivor retreated into darkness. 4 down. How many remaining? She moved to Tower East, sprinting across open ground while bullets chewed up the dirt behind her. The tower ladder was exposed, but she climbed fast, pulling herself up and rolling into the fighting position just as rounds sparked off the metal rungs below. From this angle, she had a clear view of the southern approach. She counted 8 figures moving through the tree line, attempting to flank her previous position. They hadn't expected her to relocate so quickly. Lauren fired methodically. 2 shots, center mass. 1 target dropped, the others scattered. She shifted aim, fired again. Another hit. But now they knew she was mobile. They knew she wasn't pinned. And they were adapting. At 2,015 hours, Lauren heard the mortars. 3 distant thumps, almost gentle, then the whistling descent. She was already moving, throwing herself down the tower ladder and sprinting for the concrete bunker near the operations center. The first mortar round detonated in the vehicle bay, throwing shrapnel against the metal walls. The second hit, tower south, collapsing the upper platform. The third missed entirely, exploding in the empty ground beyond the perimeter. They were ranging shots, adjusting fire. The next salvo would be more accurate. Lauren didn't give them the chance. She grabbed 2 fragmentation grenades from the armory and moved to the eastern perimeter fence. Through gaps in the wire, she could see movement, a mortar team setting up for another volley, maybe 200 meters out. Too far for grenades. Perfect for her rifle. She set up prone behind a concrete barrier, regulated her breathing, and waited for them to silhouette themselves against the sky. When the mortar crew rose to load the next round, Lauren fired 3 times in rapid succession. At least one hit she heard someone scream. The mortar tube tilted, unfired. The crew abandoned it. No more mortar fire came. Small victory. But small victories were all she'd get tonight. By 20:47 hours, Lauren had relocated 4 times, fired 38 rounds, and confirmed 8 enemy kills with 3 more probable. She was down to 162 rounds of rifle ammunition, and her body was starting to register the cost of constant movement. Adrenaline could only override exhaustion for so long. She was in Tower West when she finally stopped moving and assessed. The enemy had pulled back beyond effective rifle range. They were regrouping, evaluating. They'd expected to overrun an abandoned base or face token resistance. Instead, they'd lost nearly 10% of their force in the first hour to a single defender they couldn't pin down. Lauren checked the motion sensors. Contacts all around the perimeter, but holding position. Probing for weaknesses. Testing her response time. She pulled out a canteen and drank slowly, forcing herself not to gulp. Water discipline, food discipline, ammunition discipline. Everything mattered now. Through her scope, she saw flashlights moving in the enemy staging area. They were gathering, consolidating, planning. She counted the lights, 20 visible, probably more she couldn't see. At least 30 still active, maybe 40. And it was only the first hour. Lauren reloaded her rifle, checked her grenades, and settled into the corner of the tower where she had sightlines on 3 approaches. They would come again, soon. She'd be ready. 2,047 hours to 2,147 hours. The second assault came from 2 directions simultaneously, east and north. Smart. Force her to divide attention, create gaps in coverage. Lauren watched them approach through her night vision monocular. 12 figures on the eastern side, moving in a staggered line. 8 from the north, using a dry creek bed for concealment. She couldn't cover both approaches from a single position, so she'd make them think she could. Lauren fired 3 rapid shots toward the eastern group, then sprinted across the compound to Tower North. She arrived just as the northern element emerged from the creek bed and fired 4 more shots. 2 hits. The survivors dove for cover. Then back to the east. The group there had advanced during her absence, reaching the outer fence line. She engaged from a ground-level position this time, firing from behind a burned-out generator housing. 3 shots. 1 hit, 2 misses. But the misses were intentional, spaced wide, coming from a different angle than her previous shots. The enemy started reacting strangely, shouting to each other. Confused, their advance faltered. They thought there were multiple defenders. Lauren exploited the confusion ruthlessly. She moved to the motor pool and fired from the window of a damaged Humvee, then to the command center roof, then to a spider hole she'd prepared during the afternoon, a shallow depression behind sandbags that gave her a ground-level firing position with excellent concealment. Each time she fired, she varied her pattern. Sometimes single shots, sometimes 2 or 3 rapidly. Sometimes she'd wait a full minute between shots, letting them wonder if the last shooter had repositioned or if a new one was engaging. The enemy advance stalled completely. They went into defensive formations, anticipating attacks from multiple positions. Their fire became scattered, undirected, shooting at shadows and ghosts. Lauren was creating a phantom garrison with nothing but movement and timing. At 2,118 hours, they tried a different tactic. A fire team rushed the main gate under heavy covering fire. 6 men, moving fast, weapons up. They'd given up on stealth and committed to a direct assault. Lauren let them reach the gate. Let them think they'd succeeded in breaching the perimeter. Then, she detonated one of the fragmentation grenades she'd rigged to the gate's internal frame that afternoon. The explosion caught 4 of them in the kill radius. The other 2 retreated, dragging wounded. The covering fire intensified, but it was anger and frustration now, not tactical. They were shooting at where they thought she might be, not where she was. Lauren used the chaos to relocate to Tower East and pick off 2 more targets who'd exposed themselves while firing wildly. Silence fell again. Unnatural and tense. Lauren checked her ammunition. 118 rounds remaining. 27 enemy down, by her count. But they kept coming, kept adapting. They still had the numbers. She had the position and the darkness. It would have to be enough. By 21:45 hours, the enemy had changed tactics again. They stopped trying to assault directly. Instead, they set up static positions around the perimeter and began sustained harassing fire. Hundreds of rounds poured into the base, forcing Lauren to stay low, limiting her ability to move or return fire effectively. They were pinning her, fixing her in place, which meant they were preparing something else. Lauren crawled through the operations center and checked the motion sensors. The contacts around the perimeter hadn't moved, but new contacts were appearing on the southern approach. More reinforcements. She'd killed 27. They'd just brought in replacements to make up the loss and then some. The math was getting worse. Lauren moved to the armory and inventoried what remained. 118 rounds of 7.62 millimeters, 12 rounds of .50 caliber, 3 fragmentation grenades, 1 smoke grenade, 1 flare. She looked at the radio set, still broadcasting its automated emergency beacon to no one. No help was coming. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. She could run, leave the base, disappear into the terrain. They'd secure the position, but she'd be alive. But if she ran, they'd hold this ground. They'd use it as a staging point for future operations. They'd move freely through the valley, threatening supply routes and friendly positions. This base mattered, not for what it was, but for what it prevented. Lauren loaded her rifle, stuffed the remaining grenades into her pockets, and climbed back to Tower North. Running wasn't an option she'd ever seriously considered. She'd hold, for as long as she could, 2,147 hours to 2,247 hours. The bullet hit Lauren at 2,203 hours. She was transitioning between positions, a movement she'd made a dozen times already, when a burst of automatic fire caught her crossing open ground. Most of the rounds missed. One didn't. It struck her left shoulder, just below the armor plate edge. Not a killing hit, but it punched through muscle and exited clean. Pain exploded white-hot down her arm. Lauren dropped, rolled behind cover, and pressed her hand against the wound. Blood welled between her fingers, warm and steady. Not arterial, she'd live. But her left arm was compromised. Every movement sent lightning through her shoulder. She pulled out her medical kit one-handed and packed the wound with gauze, then secured it with tape that wouldn't hold properly but would have to do. No time for proper treatment. The enemy knew they'd hit someone. They were advancing on her position. Lauren grabbed her rifle, braced it against the wall, and fired 3 one-handed shots at the approaching figures. Awkward, unsteady, but close range. All 3 hit. The advance stopped, but she'd revealed her injury. They'd seen her fire one-handed, seen her favor her right side. They knew she was wounded now. Alone, running out of ammunition and bleeding. At 2,219 hours, Lauren was back in Tower North, trying to control the shaking in her hands. Shock was setting in. Not full shock, not yet, but the precursor. The cold feeling creeping up from her extremities. The way sound seemed distant and muffled. She drank water, forced herself to eat a protein bar from her pack even though she wasn't hungry. The body needed fuel, even when the mind refused food. Her shoulder throbbed. Each heartbeat sent a pulse of pain through the wound. She'd stopped the bleeding, but there was nothing she could do about the damage. The arm would work barely, but it wouldn't be reliable. Lauren switched to her pistol for close defense and kept the rifle for precision work. Adapted. Survived. Through the tower window, she could see the enemy had pulled back again. Not retreating, consolidating. She'd hurt them badly. They were being cautious now. But cautious meant patient. And patient meant they could afford to wait while she bled. while her ammunition dwindled, while exhaustion dragged her down. Time was their weapon now. In the silence, memory surfaced. Lauren was 7 years old when her hair started turning white. Not gradually, almost overnight. A week of severe flu, fever so high it should have hospitalized her, and when it broke, white streaks ran through her brown hair like frost. By 9, her entire head was snow white. Kids called her ghost, called her witch, called her old lady. She'd learned to ignore it, but ignoring didn't mean it didn't hurt. Her father, career, military, 2 tours in Gulf War, had sat her down one evening after a particularly bad day at school. People see what's different first, he told her. What's unusual. But different isn't weak. Sometimes different is stronger. You just have to show them. How? She'd asked. By standing when everyone expects you to fall. He died 3 years later. Heart attack during a training exercise. She'd joined the military at 18, partly to honor him, partly to prove something to herself. And now, 15 years later, she was alone on an empty base, wounded and outnumbered, still standing when everyone expected her to fall. Some lessons ran deep. At 2,241 hours, the enemy tried psychological warfare. A voice called out in heavily accented English from the darkness beyond the perimeter. You are alone. You are wounded. We know this. Surrender now. We will let you live. Lauren didn't respond, didn't move. You fight well. We respect this. But you cannot win. How many bullets do you have? How long can you last? Silence. Your people left you. They do not care if you live or die. Why die for them? Lauren sighted her rifle on the source of the voice. 800 meters. Difficult shot in darkness, but possible. She didn't take it. Better to let them think she was considering their offer. Let them believe their words were working. The voice continued for another minute, then gave up. 10 minutes later, they attacked again. 3-prong assault, full commitment. They decided talking wouldn't work, and patience was costing them too much. Lauren met them with precise, measured fire. She'd moved to a new position while they were talking, using their distraction against them. When they hit the main gate, expecting her to be in the towers, she was actually in the motor pool with a clear flanking shot. 4 more down before they adjusted. Then she moved again, relocated to the command center roof, and caught them in another crossfire. 2 more casualties. They pulled back, frustrated and bloodied. Lauren's ammunition count, 71 rounds remaining. Enemy count, approximately 65 still active. The math kept getting worse, but she was still here, still fighting. And the base still stood. 2,347 hours to 0047 hours. Somewhere around midnight, they started calling her the White Ghost. Lauren heard it first through scattered radio chatter she'd been monitoring on a captured enemy frequency. Voices in a language she didn't speak, but one word kept repeating, something that sounded like Bili Prizrak. She didn't know the language, but she understood the tone. Fear, uncertainty, superstition. They'd seen her hair, that bright white signature under moonlight, appearing and disappearing across the base, like something that couldn't be killed or pinned down. She'd shot from positions that should have been impossible to reach so quickly. She'd killed their fighters from angles they couldn't predict. And she was still there, hour after hour, when by all logic she should have been dead or fled. So they'd given her a name, the White Ghost. Lauren smiled grimly. Let them fear. Fear was a weapon like any other. At 0012 hours, she heard them arguing. The radio chatter intensified, heated voices. Disagreement. Lauren didn't need translation to understand. They were debating whether to continue the assault or withdraw. They'd lost 30-plus fighters to a single defender. Pride demanded they finish it. Pragmatism suggested the cost was too high. Lauren decided to influence their debate. She'd been conserving the .50 caliber ammunition for the mounted gun in Tower North, 12 rounds, too precious to waste. But now, psychological impact mattered more than tactical efficiency. She climbed to Tower North, uncovered the heavy machine gun, and loaded the belt. Through the night vision scope, she could see their staging area, clearly vehicles, supply caches, command element. She didn't aim for personnel, she aimed for a fuel truck. The .50 caliber round punched through the truck's tank like it was paper. Fuel sprayed, ignited from some hot engine component, and the vehicle erupted into a fireball that lit up the night like a small sun. Secondary explosions followed as ammunition in nearby vehicles cooked off. Men scattered, silhouettes against the flames, and Lauren put 4 more .50 caliber rounds into the chaos, not aiming to kill, but to destroy equipment, supplies, infrastructure. When she stopped firing, their staging area was burning, and the radio chatter had gone silent. Then, slowly, voices returned. Different tone now, not arguing, deciding. They were staying. They'd committed too much to withdraw now. It had become personal. Good. Angry enemies made mistakes. At 0031 hours, Lauren discovered they'd infiltrated the southern section of the base. She'd been focused on the northern and eastern approaches where most of the pressure had been, and they'd used her distraction to slip a small team through the damaged southern perimeter. Smart. Classic infiltration tactics. She spotted them when movement triggered one of the interior motion sensors. 6 figures, inside the wire, moving toward the command center. If they reached it, they'd control the high ground and interior positions. The base would be compromised. Lauren had maybe 90 seconds before they completed their approach. She grabbed the last 3 fragmentation grenades and sprinted across open ground toward the command center's rear entrance. Bullets chased her. The infiltration team had spotted her movement, but she made it to cover with seconds to spare. The team was approaching the front entrance. They'd stack, breach, and clear. Standard procedure. Lauren pulled the pin on the first grenade, counted 2 seconds, and threw it through the front door gap just as they stacked outside. She hit the ground as the detonation shook the building. Screams. Confusion. She threw the second grenade before they could recover. When the smoke cleared, 4 of the 6 were down. The other 2 had fled back toward the perimeter. Lauren secured the command center, checked for more infiltrators, found none. Her hands were shaking, adrenaline overload. She forced herself to breathe slowly, count to 10, regain control. Her shoulder wound had reopened. Blood soaked through the makeshift bandage. She repacked it, used her last roll of medical tape. Ammunition count, 47 rounds. Time 0043 hours. She'd been fighting for over 5 hours, and they were still out there, still coming. 0047 hours to 0147 hours. Dawn was still hours away. Lauren sat in Tower North, back against the sandbags, and stared at her remaining ammunition. 47 rounds in her rifle, 1 15-round pistol magazine, 1 smoke grenade. That was everything. No more fragmentation grenades. No more .50 caliber. No more tricks or contingencies. When these bullets were gone, she'd have nothing but a rifle to use as a club. She could leave now, slip out through the western perimeter where the enemy presence was lightest, disappear into the terrain, live to fight another day. Lauren looked at the base around her. It was barely recognizable anymore. Towers damaged, buildings scorched, equipment destroyed. But it still stood. The flag on the command center pole still flew, tattered and bullet-riddled. This position controlled Route Whiskey. If the enemy held it, they'd interdict supplies to 3 forward positions and a civilian population center. Hundreds of people would suffer. Military operations would be compromised. 1 base, 1 road, 1 night. It mattered. Lauren loaded her last full magazine into her rifle. She'd chosen this, not the abandonment that had been done to her, but the staying. That was her choice. She stood, shouldered her rifle, and moved to a firing position. If she was going to die tonight, she'd die standing. At 0103 hours, they launched their final assault. Every remaining fighter. Full commitment. No subtlety, no tactics, just overwhelming force directed at a single objective. Take the base, or die trying. Lauren saw them coming from 300 meters. A wave of figures, 40 or more, advancing in a skirmish line across open ground. They'd given up on clever approaches. This was pure aggression, betting that sheer numbers would overcome her defensive fire. She settled into her shooting position, controlled her breathing, and began firing. 1 shot, 1 target, moved to the next. The rifle kicked against her good shoulder. The wounded one screamed protest, but she ignored it. Discipline, precision, economy of force. She fired 23 rounds in 2 minutes. Not rapid fire, she couldn't afford to waste ammunition. Each shot was aimed, Calculated. Center mass. High percentage targets. 14 hits, 14 enemy down. The wave faltered, broke, reformed. They came again. Lauren fired her last 24 rifle rounds, 18 more hits. Then the magazine was empty. She dropped it, drew her pistol, and waited for them to close the distance. They reached the perimeter fence at 0119 hours. 40 had started the assault. 16 were still moving, wounded, enraged, but moving. Lauren engaged with her pistol from 15 meters close range, iron sights. She hit 8 before the slide locked back empty. 8 remaining. No ammunition. Lauren dropped behind cover as bullets tore through the air where her head had been. She grabbed her empty rifle, reversed it, gripped the barrel like a bat. They came through the gate. 4 entered. Lauren met them in the motor pool bay confined space, limited fields of fire, close quarters where numbers mattered less and violence of action mattered more. She swung the rifle like a club, caught the first man across the jaw. He dropped. The second raised his weapon, but Lauren was already inside his reach, driving the rifle stock into his throat. He went down choking. The third and fourth rushed her together. She couldn't block both. One grabbed her wounded shoulder and pain exploded white and absolute. Lauren screamed, but kept moving, drove her elbow into his face, then grabbed his rifle and used it against the fourth man, firing a burst point blank. Both went down. Lauren stood in the center of the motor pool, breathing hard, bleeding from her shoulder, and a dozen new cuts she hadn't noticed receiving. Her ears rang, her vision swam. 4 enemy remained outside. She could hear them approaching. No ammunition, no strength, no options. But she was still standing. At 0134 hours, the remaining 4 enemy fighters entered the base. Lauren was waiting in the command center. She'd barricaded the door with furniture, creating a fatal funnel. When they breached, she'd meet them their last stand, no retreat. She held a combat knife in her good hand. It felt small, inadequate, but it would have to do. The door shook. Someone shouted orders outside. They were preparing to breach. Lauren crouched behind an overturned desk, knife ready, and waited. The door exploded inward. 2 figures rushed through, weapons raised. Lauren launched herself at them, not with any hope of winning, but with the fury of someone who'd been fighting alone for 6 hours and refused to quit. She tackled the first man, drove the knife toward his chest. He blocked. They grappled. His partner tried to shoot, but couldn't get a clear angle. Lauren fought with everything left, teeth, elbows, desperation. Then gunfire erupted, not from inside the command center, from outside. Different weapons, different pattern. The man Lauren was fighting jerked, blood spraying from his back. His partner spun toward the exterior door and was cut down by a sustained burst of automatic fire. Lauren scrambled backward, confused, disoriented. Heavy boots thundered on concrete. Voices called in English-American English. Clear left, clear right. Friendly in the command center. Cease fire. Lauren lowered her knife slowly as figures in U.S. military gear poured into the base, securing positions, engaging the last 2 enemy fighters who tried to flee. It was over. She'd held the line until relief arrived. The base still stood. 0147 hours extract team arrival. Captain Morrison was the first through the command center door. He stopped when he saw her white hair matted with blood and dirt, face cut and bruised, left arm hanging uselessly, knife still gripped in her right hand. Behind her, the command center was destroyed. Bullet holes riddled every surface. Smoke hung in the air. "Hayes," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. Lauren just stared at him. She couldn't quite process that this was real, that help had actually come. "Medic," Morrison shouted. Then to Lauren, quieter, "You're safe. We're here. You're safe." Lauren nodded slowly. Set down the knife, tried to stand and couldn't. Her legs finally gave out. Morrison caught her, lowered her to sitting position against the wall. The medic arrived, started assessing her wounds. Lauren barely felt it. "They said the sector was clear," she managed. Morrison's face went hard. "I know. Intel was wrong. When we couldn't raise you on radio, I pushed through orders to send an immediate extract team. Got here as fast as we could." "How many?" Lauren asked. "How many of them?" Morrison looked at Lieutenant Chen, who'd been coordinating with the security team sweeping the base perimeter. Chen's voice was quiet when he answered, "We count 64 enemy KIA. Another 28 wounded who fled blood trails heading south. 92 total contacts confirmed." Morrison stared at Lauren. "You fought 92 enemy combatants, alone, for 8 hours." Lauren closed her eyes. The number felt abstract, impossible. But the evidence was everywhere. Bodies, brass casings, blood trails, destruction. "I had the position," she said simply. "They just had numbers." Over the next 2 hours, as medics treated Lauren's wounds and the extract team secured the base, the full scope of what had happened became clear. The enemy had staged this as a major operation. Intelligence had been dead wrong, they hadn't pulled back, they'd repositioned for offensive action. FOB Redemption was supposed to be their opening move, securing a strategic position for follow-on operations. They'd sent 92 fighters expecting to overwhelm token resistance or occupy an abandoned position. Instead, they'd run into Lauren Hayes. 64 dead, 28 wounded, complete mission failure. The surviving elements had scattered, their offensive capability broken before it began. All because one soldier refused to abandon her post. Morrison found Lauren sitting on the hood of an extraction vehicle, her arm in a sling, fresh bandages covering the wounds the medics could reach. She was staring at the base at the damage, the scars of battle, the bodies being documented and removed. "Command wants to put you in for the Medal of Honor," Morrison said. Lauren shook her head slowly. "I don't want a medal. You held an entire base against a battalion-sized element for 8 hours. You deserve recognition." "I held my post. That's the job. That's what we all do." Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why didn't you retreat? When you realized how many there were, you could have evacuated. No one would have blamed you." Lauren looked at him. Her gray eyes were distant, tired. "This position mattered. If I left, they'd have taken it, used it. People would have died because I ran. You almost died." "Almost doesn't matter." She gestured at the base, at the flag, still flying despite everything. "This is still ours. That matters." Morrison had no response to that. 3 days later, Forward Operating Base Phoenix. The story spread like wildfire through the military network. The White Ghost, the lone defender, the woman who held a base against an army. Details got exaggerated in the retelling. Some accounts claimed she'd fought off 300 enemy. Others said she'd done it all with a knife. The truth was impressive enough, but the truth wasn't what caught fire. It was the image. White-haired woman standing alone in a guard tower, rifle in hand, refusing to yield. Something about it resonated ancient and modern simultaneously. A warrior from legend transplanted into contemporary war. Lauren hated it. She'd been transferred to FOB Phoenix for medical treatment and debriefing. Her shoulder would heal, but she'd need physical therapy to restore full function. The cuts and bruises were superficial. The exhaustion was deep but manageable. The attention was unbearable. Every soldier wanted to meet her, shake her hand, hear the story directly. Command kept pushing for interviews, official recognition, media coverage. She refused everything except the debriefing. Answered questions factually, without embellishment. Accepted no praise that felt undeserved. "You're a hero," an eager lieutenant told her in the mess hall. "I did my job," Lauren replied. "That's not heroism. That's baseline." But the name stuck. White Ghost. It followed her through every conversation, every interaction. She couldn't escape it. 2 weeks after the battle, Major Paulson was relieved of duty. The investigation concluded that his intelligence assessment had been negligently wrong and his decision to leave Hayes alone at FOB Redemption violated multiple protocols regarding minimum force security. He'd prioritized convenience over soldier safety. He would face a court-martial. Morrison testified at the preliminary hearing. He described the order to leave Hayes, his objections, the way those objections had been overruled. He was cleared of wrongdoing, but the guilt still sat heavy. He visited Lauren in the hospital ward at Phoenix. "I should have pushed harder," he told her. "I should have insisted we extract you immediately." Lauren was sitting up in bed, reading a book. She looked at Morrison with the same neutral expression she always wore. "You followed orders. That's the job. Orders that almost got you killed. Orders I survived." She closed the book. "Morrison, I don't blame you. The decision was made above your level. You came back for me as soon as you could. That matters more." Morrison nodded slowly. What happens now? For you? Lauren shrugged with her good shoulder. Physical therapy. Return to duty. Find another position where I'm useful. You could write your ticket anywhere. After this, any unit would take you. I don't want special treatment. I want to do the work. It was the most Lauren Hayes answer Morrison could imagine. Some people fought for glory. Some fought for recognition. Lauren fought because the work needed doing, and she was capable of doing it. Simple, uncomplicated, rare. 4 months later, discharge ceremony. Lauren stood at attention in her dress uniform as the division commander pinned the silver star to her chest. Not the Medal of Honor, she declined that nomination until they compromised on something smaller. The ceremony was small, private, just how she wanted it. The citation was read, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States while serving as a designated marksman at Forward Operating Base Redemption. When faced with an overwhelming enemy force, Sergeant Hayes maintained her position and conducted defensive operations with exceptional skill and determination, resulting in the successful defense of a strategic installation and the defeat of a numerically superior enemy element. Dry language for 8 hours of hell. After the ceremony, Lauren changed out of her dress uniform and back into standard combat fatigues. Her shoulder had healed well enough, 90% function, they said. Good enough for duty. She reported to her new assignment, instructor position at the Army Marksmanship Training Facility. They wanted her to teach young soldiers how to shoot, but more importantly, how to think under pressure, how to adapt, how to stand when everything's said to run. Morrison found her packing her gear that evening. Training duty, he said. Safe, stationary, probably boring as hell for you. Lauren smiled slightly. Maybe boring is what I need. You earned it. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering him for months. Do you regret it? Staying at Redemption? Fighting instead of retreating? Lauren considered the question seriously. No, if I'd run, the base falls. They use it as a staging point. Operations get disrupted. People die. The math was clear. You almost died. But I didn't. She zipped her bag closed, slung it over her good shoulder. Morrison, I didn't stay at Redemption because I'm suicidal or stupid. I stayed because it mattered, because someone had to. And I was the one who was there. Most people wouldn't have made that choice. Then most people aren't soldiers. She looked at him directly. You came back for me. You could have written me off, prioritized the larger operation, but you didn't. We both made choices that night. Mine just gets more attention. Morrison nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I'm glad you made it. Me too, Lauren said simply. 6 months later, Marksmanship Training Facility. Lauren stood on the firing range, watching a group of new recruits struggle with their fundamentals. Too tense, too rushed, too eager to shoot fast instead of shooting well. Breathing, she called out. Control your breathing. The rifle doesn't care how fast you shoot. It cares about how well you shoot. One recruit, a young woman with dark hair and nervous energy, kept jerking the trigger. Her shot scattered across the target, nowhere near center mass. Lauren walked over, placed a hand on her shoulder. You're fighting the rifle. Stop fighting it. Let it do what it's designed to do. You just guide it. I'm trying, the recruit said, frustrated. Try less. Think more, Lauren demonstrated, settling into a shooting position with practiced ease. Breathing, stance, sight picture, trigger squeeze, 4 steps. Every time, the fundamentals don't change under pressure. They become automatic. She fired. Center mass, tight grouping. The recruit tried again, forcing herself to slow down. Better. Still not perfect, but better. Progress, Lauren said. That's all any of us can manage. Progress. At night, sometimes, Lauren would drive out to the range and sit alone in the darkness. The memories of Redemption didn't haunt her, not exactly. But they were always there, just below the surface. The 8 hours that changed everything and nothing simultaneously. She'd received letters, dozens of them, from soldiers who'd heard the story and wanted to thank her, from civilians who found inspiration in the account, from journalists who wanted interviews. She answered none of them. The story wasn't the point. The story was already distorted, exaggerated, turned into something it wasn't. People wanted a legend, a hero, a symbol. Lauren was just a soldier who'd done her job under difficult circumstances, nothing more, nothing less. One evening, Morrison visited. He'd been promoted to major, assigned to a staff position at division headquarters. He found Lauren on the range, cleaning her rifle, the same M110 she'd used at Redemption. "You kept it," he said. "It works. Why replace what works?" They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the mountains. Finally, Morrison spoke. "They're teaching your defense at the academy. The tactics you used, how you created the illusion of multiple defenders, how you managed ammunition conservation under sustained contact. It's becoming doctrine." Lauren frowned. It wasn't doctrine, it was improvisation. Best doctrine usually is. Morrison paused. "The base has a new name, officially. FOB Redemption is now called Firebase Hayes." Lauren's head snapped toward him. "They can't do that." "Already done. You held the line when everyone else left. That deserves recognition. I don't want my name on a base." "Too late. It's official." Morrison smiled slightly. "Besides, it's not about what you want. It's about what it means to everyone else. You showed that one soldier, in the right place with the right determination, can change the outcome. That matters." Lauren was quiet for a long time. Then, "I wasn't special. Any trained soldier would have done the same." "Maybe. But you're the one who did it. You're the one who stood." 2 years later, Lauren Hayes retired from active duty at the rank of Staff Sergeant. She declined every promotion opportunity that would have pulled her from practical work into administrative roles. She took a job as a civilian marksmanship instructor, teaching at both military and law enforcement facilities. The work was quieter, less dramatic, but it mattered in its own way. Every student she trained was someone who might need those skills someday, who might face their own moment where standing or running made all the difference. The legend of the White Ghost faded gradually. New stories emerged, new heroes. The military moved on, as it always did. But Firebase Hayes still carried her name. And occasionally, young soldiers would hear the story, usually embellished, rarely accurate, and ask their instructors if it was true. The instructors would tell them yes, a woman really did hold a base alone for 8 hours against overwhelming odds. The details varied, but the core truth remained. And sometimes they'd add, "She still teaches. If you're lucky, you might train under her someday." Those soldiers always listened a little harder in her classes, tried a little more in their drills, wanted to prove something to the quiet woman with white hair who never raised her voice but somehow commanded absolute respect. Lauren lived simply, a small apartment near the training facility, no decorations except a single photograph. The flag at FOB Redemption, tattered and bullet-riddled, still flying above the command center. She'd kept that photograph not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what duty meant, of what standing your ground cost and why it mattered anyway. On quiet evenings, she'd sit on her balcony with a cup of coffee and watch the sunset. No regrets, no second-guessing. She'd done what needed doing. She'd stood when others had run. She'd held the line. That was enough. Some nights, very rarely, she'd dream of that night. The weight of the rifle, the red lights blinking in darkness, the endless wave of enemies that just kept coming, the moment when ammunition ran out and only determination remained. She'd wake from those dreams not with fear, but with quiet satisfaction. She'd been tested to her absolute limit, and she'd held. The rest was just details. 20 years later, Major General Morrison, long since retired himself, attended a military history conference where a young captain presented a paper on defensive operations in asymmetric warfare. The case study was Firebase Hayes, the defense of FOB Redemption, 1 soldier, 92 enemy, 8 hours, and a lesson in why position, determination, and skill could overcome numerical superiority. Morrison listened to the presentation and smiled slightly. The captain got most of the facts right. Some details were wrong, inflated by time and retelling, but the core truth remained intact. After the presentation, someone asked, "Whatever happened to Sergeant Hayes? Is she still alive?" The captain didn't know. Morrison did. He'd kept in touch over the years. Christmas cards, occasional calls. Lauren had never wanted attention, but she'd accepted friendship. She was 71 now, still teaching, though less frequently, still shooting, though her shoulders sometimes bothered her on cold days, still living quietly, without ceremony. Still standing, in her own way. Morrison didn't answer the question. Lauren had earned her privacy. Let the legend exist separately from the woman. Let her live her life without constant recognition. The one who held the line didn't need validation. She'd already proven everything that mattered. The last lesson. 3 years before the conference, Morrison had visited Lauren at her home. It was the anniversary of the battle, 27 years to the day, and he'd made it a tradition to check in on her around that time. She'd invited him inside, poured coffee, and they'd sat in her small living room where afternoon light filtered through plain curtains. The apartment was exactly as he'd expected. Functional, clean, devoid of military memorabilia, except for that single photograph. "Do you think about it?" he'd asked. That night? Lauren had considered the question carefully. She always did. Sometimes. Not the way people think, though. Not trauma or nightmares. More like remembering a difficult shift at work. Something that happened. Something that required my full attention. But it's past. A difficult shift, Morrison repeated. You held off 92 enemy combatants for 8 hours. That's more than a difficult shift. She'd shrugged. The situation was what it was. I had training. I had position. I used both. The outcome speaks for itself. Morrison had shaken his head, amazed even after all these years at her ability to reduce something extraordinary to pure pragmatism. Most people would have run. Most people weren't in my position. I was, so I dealt with it. She'd paused, then added something she rarely said. My father taught me that different isn't weak. That standing when others expect you to fall is how you show strength. I think about him that night more than I think about the enemy, wondering if he would have been proud, if I honored what he tried to teach me. He would have been, Morrison had said with absolute certainty. He would have been incredibly proud. Lauren had smiled, then a real smile, rare and genuine. Then that's enough. They'd sat in comfortable silence after that, drinking coffee and watching the afternoon fade. Morrison had left feeling like he'd witnessed something important, though he couldn't quite articulate what. Perhaps it was simply the recognition that true strength often looked like quiet contentment, that the most profound acts of courage didn't require constant retelling or celebration. They just were. Like Lauren. Like the line she'd held. Final image. An old woman with completely white hair stands on a shooting range at dawn. In her hands, a rifle worn but immaculately maintained. She settles into a shooting position with practiced ease, despite arthritis in her hands and the old shoulder wound that never quite healed right. She breathes, aims, fires. Center mass. Perfect shot. Behind her, young soldiers watch in silence. They don't know her name, don't know her history, but they recognize something in the way she moves, confidence earned through experience, skill refined through necessity. One student asks his instructor, "Who is that?" The instructor smiles slightly.